So I've been waiting to do this recipe for a while. It's a family recipe, and it's a quintessentially Italian-American dish to cook. There are some differences to the Neapolitan original, things that we had to adapt because the ingredients that we had back in Italy didn't exist in America at the time that we came over. So any good Parmesan dish starts out with a good gravy. Throw a good glug of olive oil in the bottom of a skillet over medium-low heat. I like my sauce to be spicy, so once the oil is up to temperature, I'm going to throw in probably half a tablespoon of chili flakes. You can use more or less depending on how hot you want it. Next, I've got a quarter of an onion that I'm going to chop up pretty roughly. You don't have to go crazy with this because it's going to cook for a while and break down a bit. And a few cloves of garlic. I think I used about 4 or 5. And a little shake of whole oregano. Usually at home we use Tutto Rosso crushed tomatoes, but America's Test Kitchen said this brand is the actual best tasting, so I'll take their word for it. Brand loyalty is nothing to me. Dump in the whole can, and then always rinse out the extra with some water, and that'll sort of thin out the sauce as well, because we're going to be cooking this for a while. So you don't want it to reduce too much, so you add water so that it can then turn to the right consistency that we want. Add in a few twists of pepper and a few twists of salt. Stir it on in and realize that the vessel is too small for the amount of sauce that we're making. So I'm going to put some of this aside, and you can save it for later and cook it whenever you need it. It freezes very well, actually. Bring that to a boil, and then we're going to lower it and cover it for anywhere from a half an hour to a few hours. Once you're at your final 15 minutes or so of cooking the sauce, we're going to throw in a bunch of fresh basil. This is by no means the American way. I would use dried basil for that, but I like the fresh stuff better. Next up, I've got 2 eggplants. These are actually about half the size of the ones that my mom would normally get, but they'll work just fine. Peel off the little green cap. Cut off the tip. And I like to slice them the long ways. It just makes for a nicer presentation, in my opinion. But you can also cut them crosswise and just make them into about 6 or 7 millimeter thick slices. That little end bit you don't want to use because the breading will have a hard time sticking to it. Next up, set up our dredging station. In one will go flour, one will go an egg, and one will go breadcrumbs. I'm using original breadcrumbs so we can season them in our own way. But my mom always used the Italian kind just because that was what was in the store and it said Italian on it. I'm going to use 3 eggs. That should be about enough for the amount of eggplant we're dealing with. Typical dredging situation. Dredge with flour. Dunk it into the egg. I'm using a fork so that my hand doesn't turn into a bat. And then toss them in the breadcrumbs. And I'm realizing now that this is a panko kind of texture. The breadcrumbs I normally use are a lot finer than this, but it turned out great anyway, so you can use panko if you want. It doesn't really add anything because we're going to bake it later, so it won't really retain its crispiness, but your choice. Get some cooking oil up to frying temperature. You can test it with a wooden spatula to see that it's hot enough. And once it's up to temperature, we're going to fry our eggplant on both sides, about 2 minutes per side or until it's golden brown. Now that it's all fried up, we're going to start assembling our eggplant parm. Put a layer of sauce down. This will prevent the bottom from burning. And then you're going to throw down some eggplant, a little bit more sauce. And this is low moisture mozzarella. If you're from Europe, you have probably never encountered this. This is a purely American invention as far as I can tell. It's literally the same thing as mozzarella, but without the moisture. And this is really good for melting applications. It melts without adding any extra liquid to whatever dish we're making. You can use it on pizzas, and you can use it in parm dishes, or you can just eat it in slices like I used to do when I was a kid. AKA I still do, all the time. Probably as I was filming this video. So we're going to slice this into probably 2 or 3 millimeter slivers. We don't want it to be too thick because we're going to be stacking up a lot of layers. Just a thin layer, you don't need that much. Next up, we're using the real deal Parmigiano Reggiano. You don't use the fake pre-ground stuff that's labeled as Parmesan cheese. It's not going to taste the same and it's not going to melt in the same way. And keep it going. Another layer of eggplant, another layer of sauce, another layer of cheese, and another layer of parm. And keep it going until you have however many layers you want. And the very last layer is going to be mozzarella and Parmesan. That way it crisps up and gets nice and golden brown. Throw it in a medium-high oven for about 15-20 minutes. So one of my favorite dishes of all time, grew up with it, ate it fairly frequently, and it's just so rich and cheesy, and it's got these little crispy bits on it. So many layers going on, look at that. Just that combination of fried eggplant, tomato sauce, and cheese creates such a rich flavor experience that is just unmatched. And I hope you try this out. A lot of steps, takes a while, but you've got a good meal coming your way. If you like this and you want to see more international cooking videos, hit that subscribe button and join me next time. Cheers.